November 1991, Red Square, Moscow. With the collapse of communism, freedom returns, including the freedom to demonstrate for a return to communism and to the principles of this man, Joseph Stalin, communism's high priest. "40 years after his death, in the hearts and minds of countless Russians, Stalin lives on. So powerful is the myth surrounding him, the myth created by Stalin himself, that many on this day would readily trade their newly won freedoms for a return to the iron-fisted rule of a Stalin-esque dictator.
Well, you should see it clearly. Political figures must be judged by the results of their specific political activity. I'll explain myself. In 1953, when Joseph Stalin died, all the world was on its knees to us. Churchill and Roosevelt were crawling on their bellies to our power. Now look what we have today.
Under Stalin, the metro was built, and 8 high-rises.
The best we have. Everything happened under Stalin.
Stalin's technique for shaping the mass consciousness was highly effective, even by the standards of today's Washington myth-makers. It is rooted in the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. Control of the mass media is key to Bolshevik strategy. The daily press trumpets the promises of Comrade Lenin, the party leader. He pledges land to the peasants, factories to the workers, and a paradise on earth. To dramatize his story, Lenin also mobilizes the arts, welcoming those art activists who will labor for the Bolshevik cause and liquidating those who will not. Lenin's message is that of all revolutions. Kill the fat cats, the establishment, the crybabies. Workers unite for the struggle. This means you. Lenin now focuses his propaganda machine on his most powerful rival, the church. There can be no authority higher than the Bolshevik state. God must go. So must his hated icons, the symbols of Russian spirituality. They must make way for the new gospel. Whatever serves the purpose of the revolution is moral and desirable. Lenin also despises the intelligentsia, saying, "They are not the brain, but the excrement of the nation." To which young Joseph Stalin adds, "The intellectuals must be useful to our cause or obliterated." Russia's intellectuals by the hundreds flee the country. Sergei Rachmaninoff, the brilliant composer. Vladimir Nabokov, the writer, with his parents. Marc Chagall, the painter. He escapes with his wife to Paris and becomes world famous. Before departing Russia, Fyodor Shaliapin, the renowned opera basso, encounters Stalin in the Kremlin and has a premonition. This man Stalin, he says, will blow up the Church of Jesus Christ the Savior as casually as he strolls along in his soft Caucasian boots. The Church of Jesus Christ the Savior is the symbol of Russia's spirituality and military glory, built with money donated by the people to commemorate Russia's victory over Napoleon, created by Russia's best architects and sculptors, its friezes and statuary, the labor of decades. Its destruction would be unthinkable, an atrocity. When Lenin dies in 1924, Stalin seizes power. Now it is he who must find a way to impose his will on this vast, unruly country, with no means of mass communication, and upon the minds and hearts of its 160 million ethnically mismatched people. From this day forward, nothing must cast doubt on the principles of the Stalinist regime and its politics. It must be understood that only Stalin is capable of leading this nation to glory, that his judgments are infallible, not to be questioned. Stalin knows better than even Lenin how to engineer this feat. He will fashion a colossal illusion, a mythology, more vivid and plausible than life. And to do it, he will tame and harness the arts and the press. Every writer, painter, composer, architect, and sculptor in Russia. Stalin begins by forming a ministry of ideology to ensure that nothing will be created, no book, poem, drama, painting, ballet, construction, symphony, film, nothing that does not reinforce the myth. Stalin is to enter the home, mind, and heart of every person. To do this, one of Stalin's first moves is to install a nationwide radio network. Every backwater village in the land now hears the daily voice of Moscow, eulogizing Stalin and demeaning his enemies. And the day will come when listeners to foreign broadcasts will be shot by order of Stalin. Writer Yuri Karyakin recalls.
The radio suddenly appeared in this backward, mute country. These saucer-like receivers informed the people about Soviet victories. It was like a voice from heaven. There was something religious about it, a system of instant notification, unheard of. Receiving these broadcasts created a kind of mysticism in this remote Asian land. There was something terrifying about it. I remember that feeling. I remember what that saucer meant. I remember what that saucer meant.
To follow up the voice of Moscow, a national sales force of street corner propagandists preaches the word, echoed in turn by Stalin's loyal press. Factory propagandists lecture workers during their lunch breaks, stamping in the new mythology. Our leader is great and good. You must justify his faith in you. Millions of Soviets are required to attend classes where they study Stalin's speeches and writings and learn by heart the Stalinist catechism, do's and don'ts for a politically correct way of life in which the individual, like a bee in a hive, exists solely for the welfare of the state and its sainted leaders. The curriculum emphasizes the new history of the party and Stalin's fictionalized biography. Central to this system is fear. No one wants to be the first to stop clapping. This anxiety is epidemic. Wrapping a wine bottle in a newspaper with Stalin's photo could get you marched off to the gulags. Meanwhile, Russia's publishing houses churn out millions of textbooks on the new gospel as revealed in Stalin's bogus biography. But, Stalin tells the party faithful, cinema is the magic medium. It is cinema that can weave the most powerful spell over mass consciousness and reshape the mind of our audience. We must take the cinema into our own hands, mold it to our use, and make it work for us in every language and every corner of the Soviet Union. Into each isolated village and hamlet of the immense USSR goes Stalin's mobile cinema. On wheels where possible, on sleds where not. Even by ship. Millions of Soviets see their first movie under the stars. Stalin orders construction of thousands of motion picture theaters designed to look like dream palaces. And overnight, the Soviets become a nation of film addicts.
Wednesday night, explore the possibilities.
With his mind control machinery in place, Stalin now sets out to correct the mistakes of history. He will rewrite the story of Bolshevism, casting himself as the hero. But the old Bolsheviks know better and could embarrass Stalin. He must proceed with delicacy. The Russian director, Sergei Eisenstein, who has won fame with his film Potemkin, begins work on a new epic about the Bolshevik Revolution. Word reaches Stalin that the film will lionize the two Bolshevik leaders, Lenin and Trotsky. This will not do. Trotsky is Stalin's arch-rival. It must be Lenin and Stalin who led the revolution. What Stalin whispers to Eisenstein, no one knows. But Trotsky vanishes from the film. And a mistake of history is rectified by Stalin. In later films, the new generation of cinema-goers now sees that Stalin and Lenin, not Trotsky and Lenin, led the glorious October Revolution. The myth is born. Capture the bridges and hold them. And you, go to the telephone station, take it, and act decisively. Scriptwriter Alexandra Novogrudsky remembers.
We knew that sometime beginning in the mid-30s, Stalin became the sole boss of all Soviet filmmaking, its editor-in-chief, its ultimate censor. And not a single significant film about modern times or about a history of the revolution could be made without the knowledge and consent of Stalin. More than that, the script for every such film had to have his advance approval.
New films are always taken to the Kremlin for approval.
The cinema, of course, played the immensely important role in creating the myth about Stalin, the wisest and greatest leader of all the nations, the omnipotent demigod who eclipsed all lesser mortals.
Our land stands aloof like a rock in the ocean of bourgeois states. Wave after wave crashes against it, threatening to destroy it. But the rock stands firm. Alexander Bolshagovsky recalls one such screening for Stalin.
Stalin and members of the Politburo were watching a screening of this film about the building of socialism with the Minister of Cinematography. After the third reel, Stalin rises abruptly from his chair, says nothing and walks out of the screening room, and the Minister of Cinematography leaps to his feet in concern. Beria then confronts him, shouting, "You dog, you swine, I'll crush you. You'll be my janitor. And then Beria spells out the crux of the problem. Don't you understand, you fool, that there cannot be two suns in the sky. There can only be one.
Now Lenin vanishes from history. It was Stalin alone who led the revolution. Soon, with the help of film magic, Stalin again evolves. He becomes a demigod. Here in this bedroom scene, a mother-to-be describes her beatific dream of Stalin to her husband, while avid moviegoers drink in her words. Our son will be a good, kind, sturdy boy. And when he grows up, he will be a communist. Stalin will invite him to the Kremlin and say to him, Vasily Gerasimovich, I am sending you to England because it is time to start collective farms there. Life in much of the Soviet Union is a primitive struggle to survive. Except in Stalin's dream factory, where happy shoppers luxuriate in the good life, and where for an hour the audience can share their make-believe affluence. The cinema projectionist Ganshin was the man who previewed these films for Stalin.
He didn't watch films for his pleasure, just to see what films were being produced. If the picture were politically sensitive, he would give orders for corrections.
The cinema projectionist Ganshin was the man who previewed these films for Stalin.
He didn't watch films for his pleasure, just to see what films were being produced. If the picture were politically sensitive, he would give orders for corrections.
In a masterful stroke of propaganda, Stalin now innovates a foolproof method of setting up his potential enemies for liquidation. He begins by manipulating the nation's frame of mind. At Stalin's orders, every Soviet medium sets off a great clamor of phony spy and saboteur alarms. Children help catch spy. Saboteurs try to wreck train. Cursed traitors of the motherland. Trust no one, the media trumpets. Your husband, your wife, your brother could be a capitalist spy. The Soviet cinema outdoes all other media with a virtual spy and saboteur festival. It works. Stalin has only to frame and then accuse his enemies of espionage, and the angry mob calls for their blood. Our enemies want to tear our young Soviet Republic to shreds. But we have the NKVD, our secret police. Long live our beloved friend and leader, Comrade Stalin. Stalin's deification is a process to which every writer, painter, musician, and actor must contribute, or else. Actor Alexei Diki has been serving a prison term in the Gulag. But Stalin is so impressed with the actor's commanding stage presence that he paroles him. He performs, paradoxically, the role of his own jailer, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Stalin. The film is one more brushstroke on the great canvas that Stalin is painting to correct the mistakes of history. On one occasion, Stalin, the master illusionist, plays himself. It is late autumn of 1941. Hitler's army is within 20 kilometers of the Kremlin. Nevertheless, Stalin decides to stage the traditional Red Square military parade, celebrating the October Revolution. For security reasons, the schedule has been changed, and unaware of this, the camera crew arrives too late to film Stalin's speech to the ranks, and barely in time to record the last battalions marching off to war in the falling snow. However, when the film is released, Stalin is there, exhorting his troops. The error had been remedied that same night, inside the Kremlin, when Stalin, on a mock-up of the Red Square Mausoleum, reenacted himself addressing the marchers. Few viewers will notice that his breath is not frosty, nor is snow falling. The terrified camera crew had needed several takes to get it right, much to Stalin's annoyance. The filming had not gone altogether smoothly. Indoctrination of the Red Army with the Stalin myth requires little finesse. The troops are marched into the cinema and voila, it is done. As the myth of his divinity takes hold, Stalin himself seems to undergo a transformation. In his speeches, he begins referring to himself not as I, but as Stalin, as if to say that the real Stalin is an invisible, benevolent, and all-pervasive force. A force of which the mustachioed man on the podium is but one aspect. The attraction of this idea is irresistible. In the eyes of his people, Stalin has become a god. Not everyone believes in the deification of Joseph Stalin. Boris Pilniak, a writer, publishes a novel in which a party leader schemes with a surgeon to murder a political rival on the operating table. The parallel is blindingly obvious. Mikhail Frunze, a promising young leader, had died undergoing surgery at Stalin's suggestion. His crime had been simply that he was too popular. Behind his mask, Stalin is enraged. He will take revenge 10 years later, when memory of Pilniak's novel has faded. Pilniak is then shot. From this moment forward, Stalin has a score to settle with Soviet literature. Now, every work of every writer will be developed under party scrutiny. Soviet literature enters a long, dark night, from which it will never emerge. Henceforth, writers will write for a readership of one, Stalin. The pressure mounts, and the poet Vladimir Mayakovsky takes his own life. The poet Sergei Yesenin also commits suicide. His works are banned. The novelist Bulgakov is barred by Stalin from fleeing Russia, and his books never see print. Stalin sets out to make Soviet literature as effective a mind control instrument as the cinema. But he needs a sacred cow, someone to front for him. Maxim Gorky would do nicely. At the turn of the century, his novels and plays brought him acclaim. But Gorky is sulking in Italy in self-imposed exile. Stalin settles on Gorky, but how to lure him back? Stalin makes him an offer he cannot refuse: fame and power. Gorky arrives and is greeted like the prodigal son. The celebrated author is appointed by order of Stalin to head up the newly formed Union of Soviet Writers. Gorky is to preside over their first Congress. Gorky advises his nervous audience, the enemy who does not give up is exterminated. Duped by Stalin and Henryk Yagoda, head of the secret police, Gorky unknowingly perpetrates a fraud on his fellow authors. He organizes an expedition of writers to visit the White Sea-Baltic Canal, being built on the backs of thousands of prisoners, all furnished by Stalin's secret police. It is a triumph of socialism, Gorky explains. Labor sets the prisoner free. The writers are to glorify it. Writer Yevgeny Gavrilovich was there.
I remember that they got us together, a whole train full of writers, and off we went to the White Sea-Baltic Canal, named after Stalin. The canal was being built by prisoners, dressed up specially for our benefit. Looking back, I realized this performance had all been staged. Our role as writers was to conceal from the world the existence of the repressive machine that had a stranglehold on the country.
All contact between the prisoners and the writers is carefully orchestrated. The prisoners have been advised that the slightest flaw in their performance will be swiftly followed by their execution.
When I recollect all that was really happening then, I'm amazed at my naivety. Were we really such blind idiots? Just think about the tremendous impact this kind of mass propaganda had on the destiny of humanity and the state. This was proven true in my century.
After the sightseeing, folk dances. The secret police deception is so impressive that the zealous and gullible writers who arrive prepared to accept whatever they are shown believe the pathetic charade and collaborate on a book of high praise, exalting the wisdom of Stalin, the excellence of the secret police, and the justice and decency of the Soviet penal system. Why did some of the greatest names in Soviet literature suddenly leap into Stalin's arms? For one thing, fear. They had just witnessed the fate that would otherwise be theirs. Writer Tamara Ivanova.
The times were so bad then that now it's almost impossible to understand how we survived all of that. I remember that in the house opposite the Tretiakov Picture Gallery, where we lived, we had no garbage chutes then. In the elevators and entrances, there were notices asking the residents not to flash burnt papers down the toilet because everyone was burning their archives.
Using Maxim Gorky as bait, Stalin now beams his mind control apparat westward. He suggests to the gullible Gorky that he invites some of the West's most prestigious writers to come and see for themselves this brave new world of socialism. George Bernard Shaw arrives. Romain Rolland, H.G. Wells, Henri Barbusse, André Gide, all receive a hero's welcome, are stuffed with food and misinformation. They are shown the grandiose facade of communism, but not its shabby underside. And always at their elbow, the secret police. Henri Barbusse goes home and dedicates a book to Stalin. Romain Rolland reports himself satisfied. Shaw eulogizes Stalin. The German author Leon Feuchtwanger has high praise for Stalin.
You asked me about my impression after a meeting with Stalin. My first impression was the unusual simplicity of Stalin. He has humor and responds to humor. You can understand why the people not only respect, but love him. He really is a man of the people, sprung from the people, a real representative of the 170 million Soviets. No poet could create a better man.
But for every Feuchtwanger, there is a Soviet writer who doubts. And of these courageous dissenters, Stalin makes a frightening example. I am paralyzed and absolutely helpless, writes poet Nikolai Kluyev from the Gulag, and suffer terrible loneliness. He is then shot. Gorky's one-time friend, Ishak Barbel, a writer, shot. Loneliness. He is then shot. Gorky's one-time friend, Ishak Barbel, a writer, shot. A young poet, Boris Kornilov, shot. His wife, Olga Bergholz, a poet, is imprisoned and miscarries. Now she will never bear children.
I'm crushed, crippled. Why did they torture me? They took out my soul, searched it with their stinking fingers, spat into it, then stuck it back and said, go and live.
Gorky addresses his anxious writers. He informs them that the government has given them everything and deprived them of only one thing, the right to compose their work poorly. To write poorly, he suggests, is not to praise Stalin or his works. Ignore this at your peril, Gorky advises them. More than half of his audience will eventually be shot. In defiance, a protest poem is written in great secrecy. We exist without sensing our country beneath us. 10 steps away, our words can't be heard. But where there are enough of us for half a conversation, they always commemorate the Kremlin mountaineer. His fat fingers slimy as worms, his words dependable as weight. Stalin ferrets out the author and takes hideous revenge on Osip Mandelstam, one of Russia's greatest 20th century poets. The frightened Mandelstam is forced to write a panegyric to Stalin. The sick old poet produces the complimentary poem. Stalin then sentences him to a lingering and painful death. He is declared an enemy of the people and sent to rot in the gulags, where he goes insane, dies, and is buried in a mass grave. The strongest minds in Soviet literature bend to Stalin's will. Standing like sentinels at Stalin's portrait, writer Mikhail Zoschenko and future Nobel Prize winner Boris Pasternak pay him homage. Stalin is a masterful manipulator of his image makers. For the sycophants, there is praise, privilege, celebrity, and awards of money, country villas, and trips abroad. But best of all, momentary immunity. An ardent Stalinist, Alexander Faddeev, replaces Maxim Gorky, who dies mysteriously. Stalin forces Faddeev to pass judgment on his fellows. This writer will live, that writer will die, and the other will go to the gulags. It haunts his soul, and Faddeev kills himself, leaving a note, "I have no strength to live," as art is destroyed and cannot be rebuilt. Stalin, having demonstrated that the sword is mightier than the pen, sets out to perfect the myth-making device favored by every tyrant since the time of Nero, the spectacle. Writer Lev Razgon.
Stalin loved spectacles. Well, all dictators are extremely fond of spectacles. But Stalin loved not just ordinary spectacles. He loved spectacles involving masses of people. The people were supposed to demonstrate socialist uniformity. Thousands of people, all doing exactly the same thing at the same time, all acting as one. You see, our clever organizers knew how to please Stalin by using people as constructions, turning them into complicated structures in which a man was just a nut and bolt of construction material. It was all part of Stalin's system of mind control, which was brought to perfection.
One of the men who creates these spectacles for Stalin is Vsevolod Meyerholt. He is an avant-garde stage director with an international reputation. But Stalin, who enforces blind obedience by punishing the innocent as well as the guilty, chooses to make an example of the blameless Meyerholt. He is imprisoned in the grim Lubyanka and tortured. In a letter to the government, he writes, "I, an old man, was beaten on my back and feet with a rubber hose. Lying face down on the floor, I writhed and screamed like a whipped dog." But Stalin is unmoved and orders the old man shot. He is buried in a mass grave. The inscription reads, "Common grave, number 1. Unclaimed remains." Soon after, his widow, the actress Zinaida Reich, is brutally murdered in her apartment, tortured, her eyes gouged out. The mistress of Secret Police Chief Lavrenti Beria then gets the apartment. Andrei Zhdanov a passionate Stalinist, is now made Stalin's propaganda chief and given charge of all means of mass persuasion, press, radio, cinema, music, and the performing arts. Resembling a pudgy Hitler, Zhdanov comes on strong as the final authority on every minute detail of communication and the arts. He excels at snide phrase-making, servility before the West, homeless cosmopolite, bourgeois aesthete, formalist. He edits the great composer Shostakovich, denounces the brilliant composer Prokofiev. In a special resolution on cinema, he attacks the work of world-renowned Sergei Eisenstein. The director's film, Ivan the Terrible, is seen by Stalin as a metaphor for his own brutal regime. He bans it. Out of favor with Stalin, Eisenstein dies, famous but destroyed. The prophecy uttered by the opera basso Fyodor Shaliapin after encountering Stalin in the Kremlin now comes to pass. The temple of Christ the Savior, symbol of Russian greatness, is dynamited by order of Stalin. In its place, Stalin plans to erect the Palace of the Soviets, a monument to his own greatness. But nature rebels. Like an omen, the massive new foundations sink into Mother Russia's earth. The architects are imprisoned and shot, and the intelligentsia made to clear away the rubble. The project is abandoned. Stalin has indeed created a symbol of his empire, a prophetic one. His experiment in mind control a success, Stalin now has what he desires, an Orwellian nation of idol worshippers. They are ringed by his images, cut off from every outside influence, told in words, repeated and repeated, that Stalin is good, Stalin is great, Stalin loves them, Stalin stands between them and those who would usurp their freedom. Stalin is the source and the provider of all things good. Stalin is godlike in his strength and wisdom, and all nations tremble at his feet. When a fugitive, pursued by his enemies, comes again to this sorrowful land, and when through pitch-black darkness he sees by chance the sun, then the clouds oppressing his soul seem scattered by the rays of the sun, and hope in full voice begins to speak, stirring and waking his heart anew. Then the poet's soul surges. The young Georgian who penned this ode to freedom wished to become a writer, but he failed. His name was Joseph Jugashvili, later Joseph Stalin, and he became a god instead. 40 years will pass from the day of Stalin's death to the destruction of his empire. Yet Stalin's myth is still alive, and it will live on from generation to generation in Russia until the last born of the 20th century has died, or until the world looks upon his like again.
Coming up next, travel to a world of fragile beauty on Coral Reef, Rainforest of the Sea, a Discovery Journal special. Then, for coffee lovers, a remarkable high-tech espresso machine on invention.